Coming up, what is this strange duck? We'll take you to the Pacific Northwest to find out.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, plus recording your flying world in surround virtual reality.
And who's that behind the glasses and goatee? He's a pilot, but you may know him for something else. We'll tell you as AOPA Live this week begins right now. The pieces are starting to come together. We now know who's going to head up the Department of Transportation for President-elect Trump.
Mr. Trump said this week he'd nominate a Washington insider for the job. It's Elaine Chao. Chao has been in the Department of Transportation before. She was a deputy secretary for George H.W. Bush, and she worked mostly maritime issues. She was labor secretary all 8 years of George W. Bush's presidency, and she probably won't have any trouble getting confirmation. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer praised her for her service to the country, and it probably doesn't hurt that she's married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
And to our DOT Secretary nominee, there are many issues facing general aviation in which we could use your help, ma'am, including reducing certification burdens. And in that, there's progress this week. A new company has formed to develop an STC to install a non-TSO'd autopilot from the experimental aircraft market into production airplanes. Paul Odom, a California electronics executive, is founder and CEO of the new company, the STC Group, and he's also an aircraft owner.
They were over Modesto, about 2 hours out from Camarillo, and my wife looked over at me and says, "When are we going to get a new autopilot?" And that's what started us down the road.
Trio Avionics has been building autopilots for experimental aircraft for more than a decade, with some 3,000 units in service.
I knew a guy that worked at Cessna. He's a retired Cessna engineer, and he told me about the Trio. He'd been flying one on a field approval in his 182H. Really liked it, liked the safety features of the autopilot, and that's what drove me to Trio. It's a very rich, fully featured autopilot. It's been widely deployed in the RV market and the experimental amateur build market. A lot of safety features, works really well.
The Trio Pro Pilot model is a full-featured 2-axis autopilot with overspeed and underspeed protection and the ability to fly about any procedure commanded by a WAAS GPS. But a WAAS GPS is not required. In fact, a handheld GPS will do. Odom has aligned with a number of engineers from around the industry and Trio itself to develop the STC in cooperation with the FAA's Chicago Aircraft Certification Office. Odom hopes to have STCs available for the Cessna 172 and 182 next spring, perhaps by Sun and Fun. The company expects the installed price to be around $10,000. So, some great progress for us on this whole non-TSO thing. And just a word about the price, Melissa. You know, people can go to the websites for some companies that build these experimental products and see really low prices, $2,500, $3,000 for an autopilot, and they wonder why. Well, why is it $10,000 to put it in a certified airplane? But you got to remember, what you're seeing on the website for the experimental ones is basically an autopilot computer and maybe a couple of servos. There's no installation kit and there's no installation. So by the time you add all that in, you're much closer to $10,000 or in that range. And we'll see where it ends up. With any luck, we can see them come in lower than that. But it's still great progress because, as we know, sort of any other aftermarket autopilot is going to be north of $15,000 installed easily.
Absolutely, and it's all part of our push in 2017 to break down those certification barriers and get safety-enhancing equipment into our aircraft.
Absolutely.
So making progress. And another important GA issue we have, our first hint on how the Trump administration might approach privatizing air traffic control. House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chairman Bill Schuster says President-elect Trump supports the idea. Schuster told the Associated Press that Trump generally likes the idea of separating air traffic control from the FAA. Schuster wants a nonprofit corporation to run air traffic control, and he wants user fees for the commercial users of the system. Schuster was an early Trump supporter, so he presumably has the president-elect's ear. But there is strong opposition to privatizing ATC in both the House and the Senate. And AOPA will fight any attempt to impose user fees on general aviation.
And there may be another policy change from the Trump administration that could affect flights to Cuba. Just this week, American Airlines flew the first scheduled airline flight to Havana. And as we showed you last May, Cuban authorities want to encourage general aviation flights to their island nation. And you can fly there now if you fall under one of the 12 licenses from the U.S. Treasury, but maybe not in the future. In one of his many tweets, President-elect Trump suggests he would reimpose sanctions unless there were a better deal for the Cuban people. Would that affect GA flights? Well, we just don't know yet.
But if you're thinking about flying somewhere warm, there's also the Bahamas and the Caribbean islands. AOPA has just released updated versions of the Bahamas and Caribbean pilots' guides. They have everything you need to know to plan and fly a trip to the islands. Customs, immigration info, fuel availability, maps, aerial photos, and forms, they're all in there. It's actually pretty easy to fly to the islands. It's only 50 miles from Fort Lauderdale to Bimini in the Bahamas. You can buy the guides on the AOPA website.
And not to scare you, but if you're planning an overwater flight, consider a survival course. That's what Zen pilot Robert DeLaurentis says.
Every general aviation pilot should take a survival class. Before I took the Spirit of San Diego around the world, I took an open ocean survival class. And I learned how to get into a life raft from the water. I learned how to get out of an aircraft that's filled with smoke. I learned how to don an emergency escape breathing apparatus. And I got comfortable with what could happen to me if I ditched in the open ocean. These survival classes also include polar survival, desert survival, wilderness survival. I took mine at corporate airports in Los Angeles, but they're offered all over the United States. The best part about taking a survival class is that when you register your personal locator beacon and your emergency locator transmitter, in the remarks section you can add that you've attended one of these classes. What it does is it keeps the people that are searching for you looking longer. So if they would normally search for 2 days, you might earn yourself an extra day. It's a great thing to do. I'm Robert DeLaurentis, Zen pilot. Join us next week for another survival tip.
Thanks, Robert. Good advice. When we come back, going behind the scenes of one of the really big air shows.
And you too can shoot virtual reality from your airplane. AOPA Live this week continues in just a moment.
There are many important things to consider before purchasing an aircraft. Let the experts at Aerospace Reports help guide you through the process. We combine expert knowledge with our long-standing commitment to personalized customer service to perfect your transaction. Learn more at aerospacereports.com.
Many pilots are used to using GoPros and other action cameras to document their flights, but what about taking it to the next level? Several companies are releasing 360-degree cameras for about the same price as a GoPro.
AOPA Editor-at-Large Dave Hirschman had a chance to test one of these cameras, Nikon's new KeyMission 360.
'Tis the season for cool new gadgets, and Nikon has one with the KeyMission 360. As the name implies, this video camera offers a full wraparound 360-degree view. It records video in 4K and sells for about $500. We at AOPA attached one to the wing of my RV-3 during a recent formation flight, and it produced some memorable images. I was in the middle of a group of 5 airplanes, and the camera allows you to see both ahead and behind. You can zoom in on a particular area of interest. The camera isn't perfect for aviation. There's propeller distortion and seams where the forward and aft-facing lenses overlap. This was one of our very first flights with the KeyMission 360, so we're still learning how best to use this novel new tool. But early results are promising. The camera is slim, light, and easy to start and stop. Pilots are constantly looking for new ways to share the aviation experience, and 360-degree cameras offer a wildly different perspective. Dave Hirschman, AOPA Live.
Thanks, Dave. It looks like a good way to share the experience of flying with your friends, and you can find out more about the KeyMission on the Nikon website.
Now let's test your celebrity spotting skills. Who's that man behind the Foster Grants? Okay, if you hadn't already figured it out, that should have given it away. This pilot and Eclipse 500 owner is known to millions of fans as Detective Elliot Stabler of Law & Order Special Victims Unit. Recently, I had the chance to talk with actor Chris Meloni at the Burbank Airport. So, you started rather late in life. What is it that caused you to finally go over the top and start taking lessons and go all the way?
I was 49 when I was introduced. I started my first lessons right before my 50th birthday. John Travolta. a chance meeting with John Travolta. He was gracious enough to invite me and my family down to his place in Florida, and I saw this plane that I didn't even know existed. He took me up in it, and you know when you fall in love, you know, you get bit by the bug. I got bit by the flight love bug, I guess, and that was it, man. The moments of frustration are many, but the rewards are far exceed and far outweigh any frustrations you might have. I mean, it was so rewarding to get my IFR ticket. I hadn't studied that hard since I was in college, and I appreciated that. You know, I think we don't have those opportunities as we get older to confront that. And what we do, we learn about ourselves, and it was a really, you know, it's been a very deep, a far deeper and meaningful journey than I really ever thought that it would be. The whole thing about flying, for me, has been, you know, as I said before, the whole thing has been, you know, from day one, getting back into something, having to immerse myself into something, then on the backside of all that hard work, getting something that is almost surreal. It's, one of my friends called it a time machine, someone else called it a flying carpet. You know, and you get to experience life from an absolutely unique and different perspective than 95% of the people. You know, it's a small thing, but it was really profound for me. The first time flying into Burbank and not having a side view angle like you do in a commercial airplane, but having that front cockpit window and that airport opening up as you turn, you know, onto final. I mean, you know, it's those small things where you go, wow, that was phenomenal.
He is a real enthusiast, I got to say. He's bitten by the flying bug hard, I got to tell you.
I love that kind of passion. You don't hear that a lot, so
No.
it's really fun to hear.
Yeah, he's having a good time with it. And you can see the full interview on AOPAlive.org.
A major TV series is a big production, and we have something like it in the aviation world. It's an air show, and a really big air show like the annual Blowout in Dayton, Ohio. AOPA Pilot Magazine senior editor Jill Tauman takes us behind the scenes.
The airplane noise and smiling faces can only mean one thing. It's time for the air show, the Vectron Dayton Airshow by Kroger, held each June in Dayton, Ohio. The air show welcomes 50,000 to 70,000 spectators.
To give you a framework, we have our show in this year, the 18th and 19th of June. We start planning on the 20th of June for next year. So we immediately meet, have conversations about debriefing how our show went, planning for how the show is going to go next year, and it's a year-long event with a $1.3 million budget for a 2-day weather-affected event.
There's plenty to do, lots to see, and lots to eat. AOPA members Vicki and Dave Griffin hope to sell 6,000 bags of kettle corn.
We heard about the Dayton Airshow, know it's a nice big event, and we thought, let's do it. He got his certificate, I think it's been about 5 years now. It's strange, years ago he really didn't like flying, and I bought him a Dream Flight certificate for his birthday, and he went over to Purdue and went up the first time. They let him take the controls and fly. He was done.
John Thacker and Ken Reeder are the pilots of Redline Air Shows. They're both from Ohio, and it's their first appearance at the Dayton Airshow.
My airplane's an RV-8. I've been building RVs since 1983. It is the 6th one I've built, and I've built a total of 9. We call it empty shop syndrome. So when the project's done, I don't know what to do with myself, so I sell it and then start over.
Oh, this is great. I've been coming to this air show since I was a kid, teenager, watching these guys fly, and with a couple of the other air show acts I was just talking about. A lot of times I was on the other side of the fence here watching the guys fly, but just an observer. So for me to actually be the performer this time is a real treat for me.
Rob Ryder says Dayton is where he got his start as an airshow announcer, and it's where he got mic time, exposure, and encouragement.
Bob Carlton said it best, I think. He says, my heroes are now my friends. And when I started volunteering here at Dayton, I'm looking at people like Sean D. Tucker and Patty Wagstaff and people like that, and with stars in my eyes. And now these folks are my friends.
Dayton calls itself the birthplace of aviation, not far from where Orville and Wilbur Wright first entertained curious crowds with their flying machines. It's no wonder this airshow draws a huge crowd every year. Jill Tallman, AOPA Live.
And if you'd like to spend more time behind the scenes at the Dayton Airshow, you can read all about it in Jill's article in the upcoming edition of AOPA Pilot Magazine in January. The digital edition should be out next week.
And in just a moment, if it flies like a duck.
Meet the pilots who fly with AOPA Insurance. They love flying and saving money, just like you. At AOPA Insurance, we understand how you fly and provide the coverage you need to keep on flying. Call for a free quote and see which AOPA insurance plan is right for you.
So your doctor has just told you that you need an expensive and complicated procedure. Should you do it? Dr. Jonathan Sakier has a tip on dealing with doctors.
If you have any trepidation about a course of therapy, ask for a second opinion. Any doctor worth their salt will be only too happy to help. Undue stress is unnecessary. Resolve it by getting another doctor on your team.
Dr. Sakier has 9 other tips for dealing with doctors. You can find the full video on aopalive.org. And finally, a riddle for you. What do you get if you cross a classic flying boat with a modern composite technology?
The answer might just be a Gooey Duck. AOPA Live's Paul Harrop went for a splash with this modern take on an old classic.
Lake Union traffic, Gweduck 4 Uncle Mike is departing Lake Union to the south.
Welcome to Seattle, your gateway to Alaska by air, and a seaplane might be the best way to get there. We're splashing off Lake Washington in the prototype of the Gooey Duck. It's a new look at a tried and true design.
Well, a Gooey Duck is a modern version of a 1938 or 1940 seaplane that was built by Grumman.
Drawing on the lines of the utility airplanes of past, the Gooey Duck raises the bar.
This is a better version of that airplane. It tolerates salt water without corroding. It has very, very benign handling qualities, both in the water and in the air.
It's very light and nimble on the controls. You almost forget you've got that much airplane behind you. As much of a splash as we're making on the lake up in Alaska, this airplane draws crowds.
Anchorage, it gets everybody's socks are rolling up and down. A lot of excitement up there because that's where the Grumman Widgeon and the Grumman Goose spent their lives.
Composite Creations in Oregon is bringing the kits to market. Owner builders will be able to customize interior configurations that designer Ben Ellison expects to range from utilitarian to opulent. So no matter how you plan to use your Gooey Duck, you name it. And speaking of names.
Well, when we were picking a name, all of the other names of birds, which are typically used on amphibians, have been taken.
So it became the Gooey Duck. And Ellison and team hope that name makes as big a splash as any of the old bird names that came before it. In Seattle, Paul Harrop, AOPA Live.
If you're curious about the specs, the airplane cruises at 135 knots and is pulled along by 2 Lycoming IO 540s. If you'd like to learn more, visit their website at compositecreations.net. And the name's just fun to say.
It is fun to say. And I'll bet it doesn't leak as much as the Grummans did either.
No, probably not.
Well, that'll wrap it up for this edition. Thanks so much for watching.
We hope you'll join us again next Thursday for another edition of AOPA Live This Week.